Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rolewise podcast, your show where we talk about things that are happening in the role play space, including some of your favorite games. Today, we're going to be talking about a game codenamed DC20 from the Dungeon Coach. We had saw that he has some alpha rules out there. So, because this is alpha and we're making impressions and we're going to be playing a game based on an alpha, the rules that we talk about, of course, are subject to change. Maybe because of feedback we give, or maybe because he has a very active community that gives him, it looks like, plenty of feedback towards the game and its betterment. So,
We were also asked to review this by a viewer, so
mhm.
thank you.
Yeah. So a viewer did want to know kind of our impressions, our thoughts, and what we think about the game and everything like that. So we thought we'd jump into it. And so I guess before we jump in, always want to tell you a little bit about the person and maybe the game that we're talking about. So first of all, if you're aware, there's a lot of people that are in the D&D space in terms of like the YouTube channels and everything like that. And the Dungeon Coach is one of those people that appears to be there. Now, me personally, I don't think I actually saw a lot of their content. In the past. So seeing DC20 was really kind of my first experience, kind of looking at some of the stuff that they have. I can't say the same for Brent or Jeff. Is that your first time talking or listening or seeing them?
I don't think I have, but I'm gonna go through and like search out the channel and take a look at the video and see if I've ever watched a video and just didn't realize because if I don't if a video isn't enough that like I'm subscribing and stuff, like I
Mhm.
may have watched one or part of one and not
Sure.
realized it, but I don't think I have. How about you, Brett?
I also don't think I have. I think I've seen videos pop up on my feed, but I don't think I've ever clicked on them for one reason or another.
So, based on my research, just kind of seeing what I would, kind of going through the channel and kind of clicking on some videos, especially some videos related to this new DC20 system. It seems as though the Dungeon Coach did a lot of videos related, or does a lot of videos related to D&D, and kind of specifically does a lot of videos related to like how to improve game mechanics, tips for playing in various types of states. It seems like a lot of D&D related stuff, especially creating a lot of homebrew. And I think that a lot of that homebrew and kind of fixing rules is what it seems to have inspired DC20, because he kind of took and encapsulated a lot of those things that he had already been doing for the role playing game. And instead of just creating like a fifth edition adjacent clone, he started there and seems to have navigated to something that might be a little bit more its own game. And I think, of course, it seems like he's been around for a while. So he's been building up his knowledge of the systems. He's been building up his community and everything like that. And really, I think he's got a lot of RPG enthusiasts that are going to be supporting his projects. Now, would I say I don't think I could say that he's as big of a creator in the space like a Matt Colville or the Critical Role folks, but definitely doing solid work from what I was seeing. And based on the videos I watched, super enthusiastic. And so I'm really happy to see a person who's grabbing his passion as hard as he can and chasing after it. So, I think that's kind of neat. So then the part that he's made, codenamed DC20, the Dungeon Coach 20 game, I guess. One of these days, we're going to get past all these code names now. MCDM RPG, DC20 RPG, Project Black Flag. Admittedly, that last one pretty cool. I like pirates. But one day we'll get some names for some of these games. So based on my initial impressions, the DC20 game is really for those people that like the fifth edition experience of epic role playing, but want to try something different and maybe get away from the D&D sphere. I know there's a lot of games trying to peel away players from that with their own brand of things. And so when you kind of look at the rules and everything like that, the impressions that you get is that it should be like the rules themselves seem pretty intense, but the character sheet is actually fairly simple. And based on the descriptions that we've seen, the game is really designed to be efficient, simple, should be intuitive. The things should tie together pretty well. He's tried things to make the game a little bit more fast paced, especially around things like combat, taking dice rolls around out of that. But then it seems like he's also given a lot of tips and custom rules that you can include into your game to make the game feel more like the game you want to play, based on the alpha release. Now, of course, there's probably many more things, brewing about in his head and collectively throughout the community that may make it into the final release. And so it's interesting to see where it is now and where it may end up. I think that's it, because there's no real setting for the dungeon coach that I saw. But did you guys see a setting? I didn't see a setting, and I'm not familiar enough with his work to know if he has like a Midgar or something like that.
I didn't look at the adventure, which I think is probably where you're gonna find.
Yeah, I didn't check out the adventure. Since we're gonna be playing it, I checked out some of the stuff, but not, I didn't read all. Was it 165 pages?
170 pages. It's pretty dense. And unfortunately the format, and this is not against anybody in particular, the format isn't the kind of format that I find the hardest to read. It was literally just rule after rule after rule.
Well, yeah, there isn't any art in it yet, really.
Yeah, there's no real art. There's nothing to break it up. There's no at least he could have started me on character creation and kind of got me enthused about how the different classes worked or something.
Yeah, the character creation's at the end.
So it definitely was the hardest content style stuff for me to read, because I'm the kind of guy that have a hard time just sitting down and reading okay, this is how you make an advantage, this is how you make an attack, this is how you cast a spell.
Kind of a textbook, which
and it just makes me want to play the game and give the rules a really kind of like a live fire exercise kind of
I will say one thing I do like about the format, as I was looking over it here, that I noticed is we were talking about how there seems to be a lot of math involved. At least he has the formulas up front.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very called out, like attack check formula D20 plus prime modifier plus combat mastery.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice that he has a direct thing that says this is what you should use, versus a lot of games where it's just kind of like they say it, but they don't just say it, formula above the rule. Like, this is what you do, and then there's text describing it. I kind of like that.
Yeah. No, it's like he read my mind from one of our previous conversations, that, and I'm sure it was something that he had already done before, but I think we were looking at 4th edition, and I was like I was in a section about making attacks, and I had to go to another section about how to succeed at making attacks before I realized how to succeed at making an attack. And I was like, why would you tease me on how to attack somebody? Like, this is happening here.
Why would you make it so I have to flip through 10 extra pages to find this?
Yeah. So I think that the first thing is that maybe I want to give credit here, because at least in this PDF that we were reviewing from this, because Brent did purchase the PDF and supported him for the alpha stuff. It does say that there's a Kickstarter for this going live on June 4th, which does mean that we're going to be out of the alpha phase according to what he says, and there are going to be no more updates to the alpha PDFs, and so it's all going to be that beta thing. Now, he does have a fairly active Patreon as well as Discord, so if you're part of that Kickstarter and you really want to go through there, I'm sure if you got into that community, you'd probably find that there's a lot of support and everything along those lines. But I thought that I think when one of the things that I saw that he had kind of broken down, and he said that he wanted to really hit 10 things that were there. And I don't really know if we want to go through like a 10 things kind of thing. Where do you think you want to start with how the game works from what you've read and what you like so far, and what maybe gives you a little bit of pause? You guys want to start?
Go ahead, Brent.
Whatever you think is right, Mike. I mean, from the look of the classes, they all look pretty similar to Dungeons D&D classes, so I don't have anything really to call out there.
Well,
did anything stand out to you? The spell casting is interesting because it's not fancy in spell casting like D&D, and that's kind of interesting to me.
Well, I think I'll start with a couple things that he had mentioned, and kind of like the place that he started on one of his videos, I really liked, because it talks about grit points. Did you guys have a chance to read about the grit points yet? If not, I could just give a quick overview.
No, why don't you give a quick overview?
So grit points is for the characters with high charisma and have a strong force of will, have the ability to influence and impact others around them, especially their friends and allies. I thought I like grit because when you spend a grit, you can on any creature that can hear you and make a save, you can spend 1 grit point as a reaction to grant that creature advantage on the save. So it's really interesting to give you the ability to say, okay, well, I'm spending my grit outside of my turn to like push the team forward. And that kind of leads me to the bigger comment that this game seems really active when it's not your turn.
Mhm.
And that's one thing I really like is that we talk about a lot of people that just kind of like when it's not their turn, they just kind of like
Zone out.
Well, yeah, it's been a honestly, if we're being honest, it's a deficiency of 5e
mhm,
specifically, but I think it's been a deficiency of Dungeons and Dragons for a long time. There's very little that's actually collaborative because when it's somebody's turn,
mhm.
they're literally the only people doing anything.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's combat in most games.
Yeah, well, and it feels like, and it feels like when you start to get into it, like he has an initiative system where you roll to beat a DC, and if you beat the DC, then your team goes first. But then it's all like I didn't feel like the flow of combat was necessarily anything like unique or anything. Like Dagger Hearts, like everyone just gets to go, and I get to react to you going
That's
when
very unique. Yeah.
that was very different to me from a heroic fantasy type thing. This one feels a little bit more standard in terms of like how that plays out, which I thought was it was interesting that there was a chance that you could fail because at the end of the day, the monsters and you then swap positions. So like the monsters don't roll for initiative. You beat an initiative number, and then your top person goes, then a monster, the second person goes, and a monster, etc. Or if you failed, monster goes, and the top person.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of some interesting stuff like that. But then the next part is that the game, when you talk about things like grit points, mana points, and all that kind of stuff, it seems like it has a few different currencies that they offer. And so when you're thinking about it, did you guys ever like Vancian magic in D&D? Was that your favorite style of system?
I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I don't really have a favorite style. I think it's made there to give flavor. I know a lot of people are say it's an inconvenience. It's hard to balance around, I would say that, but it didn't bother me too much.
Is that because we always play as fighters?
No, I will say one thing. I do think Vancian magic is funny from the sense that it always requires spell components, and I don't think I've ever played any game where any GM ever said, "Hey, do you have your back guano on you to cast the fireball?" Like, I don't think that's ever come up. I think that's a rule that quickly gets just thrown to the wayside. So
yeah, a lot of people wave hands at it. I know a few people that, especially the time, especially the, are you sure you want to cast that spell? It has a verbal component, and they're likely to hear you.
Yeah.
There's a few people that take it really seriously. I mean, it's Vancian magic is the system that I grew up on. I realize that there are tremendous debates online because I've tripped across a few of them, and I start to read them, and then I go, this is way more in depth. Like I'm more with magic. Is it fun to play? Does the magic user feel, regardless of what class it is, do they feel like they actually use magic, or do they only have like a couple of big banger type spells that they very seldom cast because they don't have the resources to do anything else after that? That's one of the reasons why I don't play a ton of casters, because it isn't a super amount of fun to have, do one really cool thing in a day and then throw daggers for 1 to 2 points of damage the rest of the time. Like, you might as well sit there and twiddle your thumbs or go back and watch the baggage at wherever the party left the horses.
Yeah. I have a question, Mike, and you are the only one of the three of us that would have an answer for this. In Baldur's Gate 3, is the magic Vancian, or is there a
you have spell slots and stuff,
You have to study your books at night to recover them.
Not in that way. You just
But I mean, once you use a spell, it goes away. You can't use it again.
Well, it depends on the type of class that you have, but you have your spells, your spell slots, and you have your memorized spells. Just
if you're not playing, I mean, when you're not playing a warlock that just casts Eldritch Blast all the time.
Eldritch Blast all the time. Yeah, I personally don't like in video games. I personally don't find the wizard class to be as fun as going in there with like a tanky warrior. I guess. So I didn't really play the mage class in there enough to like get
Okay.
get an idea as to like
'Cause-
what were the ins and outs of it. But I do recall them having spell books and having the like add
because
magic
most of the
and all that
time that's something that's absolutely thrown out the window
Mhm.
in video games is the Vancian magic. Even in some D&D games, like they just toss it out the window right away for an easier system of like mana cost.
Yeah, and I I don't remember if like you just had spell slots in that because I like I said I never played a wizard through that. I played mostly tanks, rogues, everybody but wizards, because wizards are just not my class, I guess. Um,
Okay.
but I don't remember honestly. Now that I think about it, I just remember Hulk smash.
But
Mm.
yeah, I don't think Vancian magic is the sacred cow that some people make it out to be. But I've already said I don't really have a
Yeah,
side
it's
in the
it's
debate.
re-
Is it fun to play? And if it's not,
it's really
then
just for flavor. So I don't
yeah.
have that. I'm not against it, but I'm not for it either.
Yeah. No, and in terms of like, and in terms of the way mana points and everything like that seem to work with this, I think having those kind of things are interesting. And in this one, they do also have stamina points. So you have stamina, grit, mana,
Action,
like, and
mana.
health points, actions. Like you have
Yeah,
a
there's
you have a
lots of
few different
currency.
Yeah,
This is
some
one of those
currencies
games
to
that
do.
has lots
you
of
just
currency.
listed
in it.
like 6 different currencies I need to keep track of to do anything.
Yeah, there's
and
lots of currency in this game.
Yeah, so I think there's going to be a little bit to say with that. Now, in terms of the magic and everything like that, I mean, it does have it does have still the verbal, somatic, and material components, just like D&D Fifth Edition. So technically, if you were the type of DM that requires your player to have the components on them to cast those spells, then you would find that your players would have to have a really big bag of spell components and all that kind of stuff.
Oh,
Now, me
good. Something I
personally,
can keep ignoring.
yeah, so I personally, I there was something, I think it was in one of the earlier editions where there was like a feat or something like that where you didn't need material components or something.
Warcasting.
Yeah, and so you just like, oh, I just every one of my characters has that apparently.
Well,
Um,
what they did is in 5th edition they did this is you can ignore most uh somatic components by having an item, I believe, like a wand or a rod, I believe is what it is. So
yeah,
I think because somatic components is weird, like, and so expensive. Like when you get down to it and you're like, oh yeah, it costs a diamond to cast. You have to have a diamond to cast lightning bolt. And does it use up the diamond? Yes, the diamond just
Mhm.
disappears. It's like, oh,
yeah. Well, and they do the same thing in this.
I'm never using this spell.
Yeah, well, in this they have the same thing. There are persistent items that can be used to cast multiple spells, and they have the other ones too. Stamina points are interesting because it's stamina points are spent on techniques and class features in place of action points when they do like martial maneuvers and stuff like that.
They're fighter mana.
And they're fighter mana effectively. So
Yep.
I am getting a little bit of it does feel a little bit gamey there, like I'm not gonna lie, it wouldn't be too far-fetched to say this feels a little Diablo-esque or something like
Right.
that to have to kind of
So
balance those
do you have a pool that refreshes every turn, or
you
does it
have
run
action
out?
points that refresh every turn.
But
So
what
you
about like the stamina points
Stamina and mana refresh after the combat, I believe, right?
yeah,
after the
so
combat? Okay.
when combat ends, you regain all stamina points. I don't think you regain mana points are regained after a long rest. Stamina points are regained after combat. However, there are other ways to gain stamina points depending on your class features.
Right. Yeah. I mean, really, this is a way to give martial characters something more than you just swing your sword. Like,
Right.
that's why they're giving them that. And the only way to
Mhm.
really limit that is with a feature
Sure.
like
No, I get that.
like you do cast. No, I'm just saying. I'm just mechanically like. I'm just explaining one of the reasons mechanically you'd make that decision. Because that becomes really hard when you have a fighter that can do an ability that does as much damage as a wizard spell, and if they can just do it all the time, it doesn't like your wizards become a
Yeah.
non-issue. Like no one will ever play a wizard.
Well, and I'd be curious if one of you guys were to play a mage, like how that would feel at low level, because I think what we could probably do is, kind of getting away from those currencies. That kind of first thing to stand out to me was the mana points, grit points, and all that kind of stuff. The second thing is that it seems like the current meta on number of levels in heroic fantasy is 10, because this game also has a level 10 that is kind of like the natural. I'm going to call it a soft cap in this case. Because there are a level 11 to 20 advancement, which they call prestige levels. couple of so like if you want to go past 10 you can, and it's for extra heroic role playing, but it doesn't like the level at 10 is your class is fully matured. It's just it's kind of like Fallout or something like that, where you can level infinitely and you have a certain package of level ups or something like that you get. Not to say
stuff you can do, but it isn't necessary.
Yeah, you're still the best thief in the world, but you're not getting unique thief abilities or anything.
Okay.
The things that he did mention is that he doesn't offer a multi-class in this. However, you do get a subclass at 3rd level. And then you can, if you want to dip into other class stuff. What he says is he wasn't really a big fan of, like in 5th edition, how when you dipped into another class, you basically dipped into level 1. What you do is you dip it in for their feats or something along those lines.
Yeah, I wasn't really a big. I agree with that. Just like Pathfinder's limiting that. I know one other person that we game with sometimes hates that. But
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, it's purely a thing that happens when people are power gaming. Like if you're a rogue and you dip into fighter, you're not dipping into fighter for a philosophical difference. You're dipping into fighter because you want that +1 hit bonus on whatever you're the chosen style. So.
Yeah, but I mean I don't necessarily think it's the players that create the problem. I mean, it's the rules. It's allowing things like that. Like,
well, it establishes a mindset.
It's allowing you to have. I have 5 levels in this character, and then I have 1 in this class, and 1 in another class, and 1 in a 4th class. Like it's whatever. It happens. Sometimes it's fun, but yeah, if the rules are written so that you can abuse them, people are going to abuse them.
Yeah, and it's a mindset. Being it's a combat game, you look at levels like, well, how do I get better at fighting? I take
how do I optimize?
How do I optimize? And that's
things go sort of. You're like, what do I need to get an edge? Because this sucks.
Right, exactly, and that's more my point, and that's always been my point about some systems, is they very much encourage a type of thought where people look at doing stuff like that.
So I think that's a natural segue to this next part that I thought was interesting, is that this game actually opens up how your character represents itself outside of the outside of your standard thing. Because one of the things that he did mention is that you start using your prime modifier and your combat modifiers or whatever they are, and it's different than how it does in D&D. And so the example that he gave is that if you want to have a charisma based character, that isn't going to hamstring your warrior, because your warrior, instead of being like your warrior's going to use his charisma in some way to basically basically a flourishing kind of charismatic swashbuckler type warrior, as opposed to the guts smashed with a giant sword kind of warrior. And so, but they're both good warriors. They're just good through different methodologies. And so he says that represents that the prime modifier represents, and that's what he calls it, the prime modifier represents your overall experience and prowess in adventure. So you can build that character much more easily in this system than you could in D&D, because if you wanted to make a paladin, you have to have XYZ stats, or else you suck as a paladin, right? Well, in this, you can say, well, I want to be the paladin that's a bookworm. I'm not a bad paladin. I'm just I just represent my score differently, and my prime modifier.
Yeah, it's clever that you get to use the prime modifier for those checks instead of just strength. I like that change. I think it gives you some build diversity. While still letting you stay in something, and then not having to feel punished because it's like, I don't have a sword and board fighter. I smash him with my shield. I slice with my sword.
It gives you character diversity.
It does.
More than anything, which is nice. Like, you can play a character. You can have a concept for a character that doesn't fit the norm, that isn't going to be suck at it, which is a lot of times what you're trying to like. That's why people don't play as interesting characters sometimes in D&D, is because they don't want to play a character that's going to suck for 2/3 of the game, which is fighting.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that's one of the neatest changes that I saw in terms of how his approach was. I think there's a pro and a con here. The fact that you can create the character that you have in here more easily on your character sheet, because you can emphasize things that you want to, but not necessarily take a drawback, because it does narratively allow you to do that. Say like you're not a bad barbarian as a charisma barbarian, but but at the same time, I feel like I'm just kind of curious how that plays out in a group, because if everyone's just taking their prime modifier for everything, isn't everybody just got a +3 and it just then you're just role playing your differences?
I mean, probably.
Yeah.
Well,
So
yeah.
I'm just wondering if it just kind of creates a little bit of a flat line and everyone's kind of
I
playing
mean,
the same character, just reskinned.
well,
yeah.
Like if you're doing arrays or point buys like most people are,
Mhm.
I'm making an assumption. I don't think most people do straight rolls for their ability scores in D&D anymore. But if you're doing an array or a point buy, we already know where your highest is going into depending on your class. We already know, so that most of the things you do regarding that class have the highest thing. I don't know. I get what you're saying, Mike. I don't, without playing it.
Yeah,
Maybe it'll feel like it's same.
I think it's something
in my
to
head it's
feel.
different.
Yeah, the third edition problem is what you're discussing, is or fourth edition problem. I mean, where everybody is like, oh, we're kind of all the same.
You do the same thing. So how do you feel distinct? And don't get me wrong, I think that this will come through character creation and how that feels in character creation. Because if you feel like you're having a good time, even if you both have like the same end result and modifiers and stuff, I don't think that's bad. I'm just curious if it like it hits you, you're like, oh well, we're both just rolling D20 +3, and so then
all the classes feel the same because
because it's just like you roll a D20 +3 and you get D6 +1 damage, and I roll a D20 +3 and I get D6 +1 damage in an effort to create balance. Even though I swung a sword and you shot a bow, is that how it is? I don't think that, obviously that's not how I feel it's going to be, and I think that we can talk about like combat a little bit next, because
I think that'll be interesting to play out. I think that's something you have to play to see how it feels, because like I remember when we played fourth edition and playing fourth edition in the past, that's when you really started to feel the difference, is playing through a couple combats, and then eventually it's like, oh, it's like we're all the same character essentially.
Yeah, except Eldritch Blast. That was
yeah.
Well, yeah, it was one of the exceptions, but I need to see the combat in person, because right now it feels like there's like 4 or 5 or 6 different modifiers I got to add to different things, and then compare it to 4 or 5 or 6 different defensive things that modify the damage. Like the system feels really crunchy, and I have been kind of moving away from crunch in games, and this one feels like it. If the crunch is worth it, great. If the crunch isn't worth it, then why are we doing it? And I hopefully we can answer that question when we play, because right now, just reading the alpha rules, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and I think that's I think that it's going to be interesting, because the role itself, it feels like, is that like when you make an attack check, you roll your D20 plus your prime modifier plus combat mastery, which is combat mastery is 1/2 your level, rounded up. And that's another thing that he does in this, is he rounds up everywhere instead of rounds down. Thank you for following math, first of all, but but
rounding down is really just if you hate your players. That's what rounding down feels like.
It feels like it, doesn't it?
It's just like, hey, fuck you, take the lower score.
Yeah, I mean, there's and almost every time they say, well, it can't be lower than 0, except there's a couple things that are like 0 means 0, asshole. Like,
right, can't be lower than 0 unless Brent rolls the dice. Oh, thanks.
Yeah, you can. A -1 to hit is still a critical fail. What? I didn't roll a -1. But yeah, so you roll your D20, add a prime modifier, and then you get your combat mastery. And the type of attacks that you have, you have your martial attacks and attack, and your regular attacks or spell attacks or whatever. Sorry, martial attacks and spell attacks. Now, what was interesting to me is that like it felt like once you maneuvered everything, because you can spend action points, and this is one thing that I thought was, I'd have to see how this plays. You can spend action points to buy advantage effectively. And I thought if you wanted to create that heroic moment, the way that you can spend action points on your turn to buy up to 3 additional dice, basically, to roll with advantage, was kind of cool. It kind of reminded me a lot of like Fallout. Yeah. And in terms of heroic fantasy, having that like that gut moment where you go like, this whatever this is needs to succeed like now.
Right.
And you go, okay, I blow all my action points on this one strike to the eye of the evil Lich King, whatever. Then you get to roll with additional advantage dice. So it's not like D&D where you kind of just get advantage or you get disadvantage. You get stacking advantage, which was insane to me.
Which is
where you get to roll all these dice. Now, he did mention that because you get 4 action points in this, if you do the same action multiple times in a turn, kind of like Pathfinder, if you try to attack multiple times, you actually get disadvantage, and you get disadvantage for every time you try to do that, and it stacks. So it becomes harder and harder to hit. So what seems like you're encouraged to do is you're encouraged to blow those action points on big things or do variety of things. Because I think also you get the 4 action points, plus you get 2 free actions that you get. And then if you want more of those simple basic free actions, you have to spend them on a 1-to-1 action point basis.
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're busy, and you spend those action points not only during your turn, but you can spend all 4 of those action points on other people's turns doing reactions or doing assists or doing all kinds of stuff. And so it's a very engaging feeling combat based on a read through. So
hopefully
that's kind of neat.
Yeah.
And then of course you have like techniques and stuff like that if you spend action points and you use the axe technique, you can cause bleed or something like that. There's a lot of ways for you to spend action points in that. So combat, I feel but just like any game, once you get used to it, you start going, okay, I've got my axe. This time I want to make him bleed. Let's make him bleed. Like,
right. or just it's advantageous here to make the bleed happen. That's what
I'm going to be interested because I mean, there's several things you can do with the action points, and maybe they're all balanced, but my guess is that some of them are way more worthwhile to do than others.
Mm-hmm.
And so unless you really want to be thematic about it, if you can spend that action point and you're getting new ones the next time, you're probably going to spend the action points doing the thing that does the most, gives you a bigger benefit. Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting, but I think you'll find that even though you have a choice of like pulling numbers purely out of thin air, 10 or 12 things you can spend the action point on, my guess is you narrow it down to the 1 or 2 or 3 things that are probably the most optimal for your character. And that's what you wind up doing. And the other things get neglected except for the one-off times where it becomes the thing that's useful.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, but what's interesting too, though, in addition to those things, though, is that you can spend your action points on cool things. Did you guys read about spell duels?
I missed that.
Yeah. So here's something though, and this is why I think there's a lot of interesting thought put into this. Is that like if you do a spell, like if somebody casts a spell against you, Jeff, and you're a mage,
okay,
and you have action points, what you can go is as a reaction, because you can see them cast that spell, you go, I trigger a spell duel, and then you basically magic off during their turn, saying like you cast you declare a spell duel and spend 2 AP and 1 and 1 or more MP to challenge a creature with a spell of your own. So let's say that creature is casting a a scorching ray or something like that. I don't know. Or they're casting magic missile, and you go, okay, well, I cast wall of ice, and all of a sudden, bang, 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 the missiles now attack, or whatever, going into your wall of ice. And so it's kind of like a cool.
There's some neat things like that. Yeah, no, I think that'll be fun. I don't know if the magic user is always going to want to do that since you have a limited number of mana points. Like you're gonna have to do it when it makes sense. Mm-hmm. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Well, it kind of takes care of the 5th edition problem of counterspell, which like there's no reason not to ever have counterspell ready, and like it takes away that moment where that anticlimactic moment that everybody talks about where like your big bad casts a spell and the other person's just like, I counterspell it, and then it's just like, okay, it's just okay.
Yeah, it doesn't seem
there's no engagement with it. It's just like, oh, okay.
Yeah. But it's just interesting too, because you can have multiple participants. Not that we have a big enough group, but multiple people can join in on these spell duels to do this stuff to kind of provide you with higher levels of success. It's very, like I said, it's very engaging in terms of how they bring some of this stuff together.
Yeah, it seems very active. It seems like it's a very active game, which is gets back to what you said about combat, where people aren't paying attention. It seems like it's
Sure.
active enough to where people will be engaged in the whole combat.
Yeah. So honestly, I mean, there's enough techniques and stuff like that to really have a lot of fun, regardless of whether you seem to be a martial or you're magic or whatever in terms of that. And I just think, you obviously have to go through and learn all of those things, because if you want to, like, they even had one that was what was the they had a maneuver that was like basically rather than have like a taunt, you just got in the way of something, like, because you could basically play a tank and you just, I don't remember, like forbearance or something like that.
Yeah.
But it was good because then you could spend action points, and then if you wanted to spend more action points, you could then you could say that you had resistance to all the attacks that you got for that round.
Yeah, you can get in the way. You can do a tank thing, which is get in the way.
Yeah, so you basically have that heroic moment where the fireball is coming and you're literally standing and soak it for the entire team, and you're like, that's badass.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah.
What else did I see that was really interesting? The damage for the weapons was interesting in so much as that, like, let me see if I can find let's see if I can find just a kind of example. So, like, if you went through and you did your hit, because the hits were neat, because if you rolled against somebody's armor class, you do a base amount of damage based on the type of weapon that you have. Now, weapons themselves have maneuvers. So, like, an axe, for example, has a maneuver that spends 1 AP. That if you deal 1 point of damage and the target makes a physical save against bleeding, then it starts taking 1 true damage at the start of your turn. Now, hit points also seem to have a lot lower numbers in this. So, like, every point of damage that you can eke out of something is like a good deal.
Right. Because the base damage on most of the weapons, like the highest is like 3, it looks like.
It wasn't very high. I think 3 is what I saw. There might be a 4 running around in there, but I did
yeah, a light ballista is 4.
A light ballista?
So yeah, a light ballista is 4. It goes
that's not
hand crossbow, light crossbow, heavy crossbow, light ballista.
So that's like Rambo, one hand in the M60.
It's a 2-handed weapon. But yeah.
Yeah, you need a might of 4 and an agility of 1 to do a light ballista. It's a pretty heavy weapon there.
Yeah.
But a 3 is still pretty good, considering that, like,
well, when 4 is the top and it's on a cannon that usually you can't carry around, 3 is pretty good.
So let's say you do your 3 damage and let's say we use axe, a great axe as the suggestion. You do your roll, you get your 3 damage, then you have other ways to modify that based on maneuvers or action points or anything like that you use, and the fact that you roll higher. You'll actually see on the character sheet that you have, maybe it's not on the character sheet, maybe it's the monsters or something that I saw, is that once you roll that first level 5 higher, it actually changes the attack to like a brutal attack, and then it's like a savage attack. I don't remember the names, don't quote me on it. But you can actually trigger additional effects that happen because you rolled 5 higher or 10 higher than the requirement for the attack.
I think that is something that's really cool that D&D doesn't have, is scales of success. I think that's kind of nice because it gives you an idea of what, I don't know. It's just nice to have gradated success as opposed to binary. You do good, you do bad. That's
and so I know the combat takes up a lot of heroic fantasy role-playing games. I would be really interested to see how this plays
I'm interested.
out.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to expect because, like I said, I never had heard of Dungeon Coach or DC20 really. Like, I think as you guys had said, you'd seen it through your feed, but it wasn't something you'd subscribed to. So nothing against them. I just only have so many.
I just don't watch a lot of D. As everyone who watches this show may be able to tell, I do not watch a lot of D&D content.
That's fair.
I have gotten away from it in my old age a little bit.
Yeah, same here. I don't watch a ton of D&D content, so I don't get a ton recommended to me.
Yeah.
So.
And honestly, I mean, while there's some good agnostic content that goes into D&D, and those creators for the D&D space are making stuff that you can use in any game, I think that a lot of creators in the space tend to make stuff that fits the D&D grind set a little bit more, and that's perfectly cool because it is the biggest game played out on the planet, so you're making it for a fairly large audience.
Yeah.
But it's also cool to see somebody like this who's had all of their homebrew turn into a realized vision of a game that's adjacent to D&D 5th edition that somebody could pick up pretty easily and still have that same
Yeah.
feeling of
Well,
game.
I think that's the good thing about all of the adjacent games. Like,
Mhm.
and a lot of them that we've talked about is like you can pick it up and it's going to feel familiar. Like, so it's going to be easier for you to pick up than,
Mhm.
like we talked about in a past video, like Forged in the Dark. That's probably going to be hard to pick up if you come straight from D&D.
Yeah.
But with these games, you can pick it up. There's a lot of familiar terminology, and not only that, but you can get the type of game that you want out of a D&D game, which is the
Mhm.
more character-centric hero game.
Yeah,
Sure.
you're a hero. You're there to save the day most of the time.
You're the hero, and the story is about you. It's not about anything else. It's really about you.
No, it was about that guy that was captured in the cave, Brent. Saved the day.
Well, yeah, it was about that guy, and we were all very happy to be his sidekicks too.
the supporting characters.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So, there's still more we could talk about. We could obviously get into the skills, the trades, the languages, and all that. That was quite a dense read. And
Yeah, for 160 pages, there's a lot in there.
Yeah, he really got.
There's a ton of information.
It's going to be more than 100. It's going to be more than 160 pages when he adds art.
Yeah. I just have to say, please, that maybe put the densest stuff towards the back so I can have a little teaser to get back there. That's all I can say. Okay, so I think our plan is really to play it on Monday. We're going to probably create characters on Monday and kind of dive into the different classes and everything and how those stack up. So expect to create a character Monday.
We're gonna do the Warlord and Warlock again, Jeff?
No, I thought this time we'd just go with 2 spellcasters. Because at level 1, multiple spellcasters are always the best at level 1.
Oh, that's always the best.
You can't beat that.
Hey, play whatever you want. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to see if there's a way for me to convert a current 5th edition adventure to see how, somebody who may be in that space experiences the transition. Maybe take something not like a fully fledged adventure, but maybe a one shot or something like that, and see how it stands up. So, do you guys have anything else that you wanted to talk about for the game, or?
No, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. I want to see how it plays. Obviously, a lot of work's gone into this. It took a lot. It took a lot of time. So this has been a labor of love before they started, bringing it to release it out to the public. And I want to see what it's like.
Yeah, and I'm always happy to see a game that I can play that is D&D like. If I get the itch to run that style of game, I don't have to use 5th edition.
Yeah, no, it's true. It is. I do feel kind of like if there was a time to be releasing a game with a lot of 5th edition adjacent or that, this is probably the hardest time to release the game. So we'll definitely give it our fairest opinion, and in our postmortem after the game to talk about feeling and all that stuff, because we do like to support the creators, big and small, that are not Wizards of the Coast. So not that we hate the people at Wizards of the Coast, we just maybe are having a aversion to D&D lately.
Some of their policies seem to be problematic. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And if we wanted to, we could even get into D&D news, but I think that's for another day.
That's for a different show.
That's for a different show. So, okay. Well, guys, thanks for the talk. Hopefully everybody enjoyed it. And if you like us rambling about different games that we're looking at and want to play, please like, subscribe, and comment. And Jeff, if they want to talk with us, how do they do that?
They find us on Facebook, Threads, Twitter, or YouTube. We are at Rolewise. Or you can email us, rollwiseguys@gmail.com.
And as always, thank you for being here. We appreciate you listening, joining us for our conversations, and all of that sort of thing. And as always, roll well, roll wise, and be safe out there. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.